I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off-road. The guy managed the group. He was like, what are you doing in this beautiful car? I'm like, I'm going off-road. He's like, are you sure? Because you can use one of ours. And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Sometimes it takes a different approach to help you unlock your true potential. Capella University's game-changing FlexPath format helps you learn at your own pace and fit earning a degree into your life. From before you enroll to after you graduate, you'll be supported by people who are invested in your success so you can pursue your goals knowing that help is available if you need it. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network. Today on the James Altucher Show.
You know, I spent all of law school kind of in this battle with myself. Do I want to be pursuing something more in the arts and entertainment field, or do I want to be here in law? When I went to law school, I had this idea in my head, which I'd been told by a couple of people: if you can do anything in your life other than work in the arts and be happy, do that. So when I entered law school, I decided I was going to give up everything else, just quit it cold turkey, do nothing but focus on the law. And I was able to make it 3 months. And so the summer after I graduated law school, I'd started to have this really crazy thought of like, wait a second, what if I did go into the arts, and what if I went into TV and film? Which was this thought I'd never had before.
You were on track to being one of the top lawyers around because of the cases you were involved in. You could have gone in any direction possible, like banking, hedge funds, being a top lawyer, being federal, being corporate, whatever. And you said, screw it, I'm going to start at the bottom in a totally different field I've never done before. When did you decide to say, hey, I hate this, I'm going to write for major TV shows from now on, and how did that happen? Excited to have Adam Perlman here. Adam, before you speak, I'll just give a little bit of an intro. You went the standard path of Harvard, then NYU Law School, then you were a practicing lawyer, and then suddenly you quit, go to TV, you switch careers completely. You write on some of my favorite shows. You write on the Newsroom, The Good Wife, Billions, which now that this podcast is airing, after Billions is airing, I could say I'm a technical advisor on this season of Billions. So that's how we got to know each other.
Technically accurate, yes.
So I'll tell you what, one time we had coffee and I said, it's so great that Billions is focusing on the reality of these people's careers and situations. And I said, as opposed to what I felt were certain scenes from The Good Wife. And then you said, are you kidding me? And I said, no. You said, I wrote, episodes of The Good Wife, right?
I wrote on the last season of The Good Wife. Yeah, you were just accidentally slagging off shows I'd worked on. It was fun. And yeah, I think that show has a lot more verisimilitude than other legal shows, but absolutely, there are things that we get wrong. We get them wrong almost always intentionally, but that's a decision back and forth, right?
Well, and I want to get to that in a little bit. But first off, I want to kind of explore the decision of going from lawyer to TV writer? Because I think a lot of people just get stuck. They're listening to this, they're stuck in their cubicle, and they're like, boy, I really wish I could have been an artist or a musician or a writer. So did you want to be a lawyer as a kid? What did you want to be when you were a kid? Like when you were 9 years old, what did you want to be?
I wanted to be center fielder for the New York Yankees, maybe center for the New York Knicks. And I never got that tall or not Jewish.
We've had two centers on the show. What's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar?
He was center.
And Bill Cartwright was a center.
Both of those are centers, yep.
Yeah. But we haven't had any baseball players on, so I'll let you know when we have that on. But okay, other than that, like by the time you were 12 or 14 and you realized that your athletic prowess was going to take you there.
No, I never thought about seriously being a lawyer. I also never thought seriously about entertainment. Really, I was focused on being a doctor. Yeah, in terms of what I thought I would be, it really took sort of a sideways detour first into theater, which was completely by chance. I needed to fill out an arts elective to graduate from high school, and the only one I could fit into my schedule was directing theater. And that class just wound up being incredibly meaningful for me and led to me doing some plays in high school and led me actually thinking about theater as a life when I went to college. And so I wound up just for sort of a side project writing a very short one-act play just because it was the sort of thing I wanted to try directing. I just wanted to give myself material to direct. And it wound up being seen by this professor I had at the time, a guy named Bob Scanlon, who was, among other things, a dramaturg to Samuel Beckett and David Mamet and David Rabe. And so a couple months later, I needed to figure out what my thesis was going to be. And so I came to him and I said, I have this idea about Arthur Miller and David Mamet, the salesman in American theater, this whole thing about capitalism and its impact on the American spirit, all kind of relevant to Billions again.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating, actually?
Well, that's the thing. I went to him about this notion and he said, well, why don't you just write a play instead? And I hadn't thought of that. He said, let's write a play together. And so that became my thesis. The first time I wrote a full-length thing was actually working with that professor and putting together this thesis play. And so I sort of stumbled through directing and through knowing him into writing something. And so when I graduated college, I was in this very strange place of, do I want to direct? Do I want to write? Do I want to do something more responsible? And I had this notion, which I'm sure other people did, of, okay, is it really responsible in this day and age, in this political environment, to just go out and be an artist? Is there something indulgent about that, being able to say that?
First, what did you learn from this guy about who's been a teacher to so many? What did you learn that surprised you about writing a play?
So to even back it up one step. So when we talk about dramaturgy, sort of the primary job of a dramaturg is to explain what a dramaturg does. And his view of it, which I've come to adopt over time, is that you're the advocate of the piece of writing. Everybody else in a room, in a production, the actors, the directors, the commercial producers, whoever else it is, have their own dog in the fight. The dramaturg should be the person who is only thinking about the play and what the play wants to be in the best possible version of that, forgetting anybody's egos or agendas. Because the writer is, besides just thinking about your career, maybe there's a reason you wanted to write the thing, right? Maybe you wanted to write it because it was about somebody you had dearly loved, or because you're trying to make a particular point about the healthcare system or whatever else it is. And then eventually that thing, even if it was motivated you to start it in the first place, might actually be fighting with the content that you've created, right? Over time, those things can actually come into opposition. And sometimes there can be, a third party almost neutral or at least invested. It's almost like a guardian ad litem, right? You'd think a parent always has the kid's best interests at heart, but sometimes you need a third party in there. And so because sort of he came from that perspective and I came from that perspective to playwriting, it was just very interesting to really think a lot about how are you telling the story? How are you letting the thing be the best version of itself? And so how do you, how through sort of structure, through the formal aspects of it, through thinking about how you build scenes one to the next and how you visualize the shape of it, how is that conveying meaning, right? In a way that maybe the viewer, the listener, whoever it is, your audience, doesn't necessarily get on rather an intellectual level, but it's there, it's underneath, it's creating this feeling of satisfaction when you've nailed it.
Well, this is going to relate to future questions that I ask you about how you write the shows that you've worked on. But the other thing I wanted to mention about Harvard and your experience there and you choosing in a certain environment to take the steady path of law, I sort of feel like Harvard's the one school where a normal career path is to go to Hollywood to write on TV shows. Like everyone in Hollywood writing on TV shows comes from Harvard.
Yeah, that is a strange thing that I wasn't super aware of while I was there.
Like you didn't work at the Harvard Lampoon or anything?
Exactly. So I didn't work at the Lampoon. I wasn't principally a comedy writer. So you're right. There's absolutely this pipeline to Conan and The Simpsons and SNL that comes through Harvard, and particularly the Lampoon, a little bit through the pudding. And instead, I was a somewhat more serious man of the theater. And so instead, I never really thought about TV or film. You know, I'm from the East Coast. I'd stayed in the East Coast my whole life. And so all I was really thinking about was New York theater.
And so you went from being New York theater to just doing what all your friends did, I'm assuming, which is apply to law school.
So law school was absolutely a sort of final semester of school freak out for me. It was the moment where I'm like, wait a second, what am I about to do? I'm just going to go to New York and just try to make it in the theater. What a crazy thing that is to do. What a crazy thing it is to do with this degree. What it's a crazy thing to do when I know other people who are about to go work for the State Department. Should I be making a bigger impact that way? And I just sort of took this for granted. A number of the other people who were sort of saying they were going to go live the artist's life, I realized all of a sudden were just vastly wealthier than I was and had more of kind of a net than I did. And that was just something I'd never put all these pieces together before. And so at the last moment said, you know what? Why don't I just apply to law school? That seems like the better way to do this. And so I got into a few law schools and chose to go to NYU because I wanted to be in New York. And I actually deferred my admission. I was going to give myself 2 years to make it in theater in New York.
And what happened?
What happened was I got to New York immediately and started working in the theater. I worked at the acting company. I worked at the Flea. I directed a play at the New York Fringe Festival. And then I got really quickly sort of exposed to the idea of what a career as a director potentially looked like. And it looked like this thing because I didn't do sort of avant-garde downtown New York theater that I thought would make an incredible splash overnight. It looked like a very long slog through working with some of these artistic directors who I was getting to see were perhaps a little bit more jaded than unfortunately you want to believe as a 22-year-old. And similarly, I was getting a look at the insides of some of these arts administration areas, looking at being a lit manager, which I was, or a dramaturg, and seeing sort of that life. And just looking at them, they started feeling a little bit less appealing than I wanted. And at the time, as I said, I was directing this play at the New York Fringe Festival, and it was frustrating the hell out of me because there was sort of this push and pull with the writer and the director. I sort of thought I was signing up for one thing that wasn't what it turned out to be. And so one day, very frustrated, I wrote an email to NYU and I said, hey, I know I'm not supposed to come for at least another year, but I'm just wondering, is there any way to potentially consider coming this fall? And I went out, and when I came back home, I had an email that said, the Committee on Admissions has formally approved your request. You begin on such and such a date.
In other words, we're happy to accept your money a year earlier than otherwise. Welcome to the team.
That's exactly right. They wanted me there in like 2 weeks, and I took that as a sign.
And so you went to law school, you graduated, and then you actually became a lawyer.
I did.
What kind of lawyer were you?
I was a corporate litigator working down the firm of Cahill Gordon down on Wall Street.
And what was something you litigated?
Let's see. I was working on behalf of some of the lenders, some of the people involved in maybe the mortgage bubble, and then looking at also some of the ratings agencies who were rating some of those loans.
So you're kind of the center of the universe of the biggest collapse ever.
I was working on some of the general corporate evil in a very small capacity under some creative and I think correct legal theories about the ratings being actually an expressive act, right? Being freedom of speech. So I was working on a bit of a freedom of speech angle, and then I was also working on some ideas that, which I also think is true, that some of the people who had invested in some of these lenders were turning around, suing them, claiming, oh my God, you were doing horribly illegal things. And the defense was to some degree, if we were, it was pretty public. And isn't that why you invested? And didn't you make money off it? So maybe go fuck yourselves. And so it was kind of an interesting little nexus, but at the same time, the world of law, especially for first time associate, is not quite as sexy as it was on TV. I was not really as deep in the trenches as the shows suggest.
But given that you were a lawyer involved in such an important kind of high stakes type of case, not like a murder case or anything, but the whole financial, the U.S. financial system like almost went into collapse because of the exact same things you were litigating
Absolutely.
around. You kind of saw that no matter who is good or evil or how you label that, it's complicated, it's messy.
Fundamentally, one of the things as a litigator that's interesting is they encourage you, right, to shed the morality, right? To shed the idea of the greater impact on culture. When you're practicing corporate litigation, it's how do you craft the best argument? How do you find the best way to defend your client? And with an understanding that if you fundamentally believe in the system, that sort of carries the day, right? If both sides have really well-trained litigators, then everything's fair and it'll all come out in the wash.
But do you see people go over the line pressing their case?
Oh, absolutely. Some of the people who are the best respected in their fields are the ones who are going to push, up to the line.
It seemed, and this is unrelated to television writing or the decision you made to make the leap eventually, but like when you say the mortgage lenders had kind of almost like a freedom of speech right to say what their ratings were, and yet often the loans they were rating, they were being fed by, they had a conflict of interest with the banks who were paying them. Now there would be disclosure issues, like so-and-so's paying us X, and this is a loan from so-and-so, so that we're rating, so we're just disclosing that. So now I feel like the law has changed more in the favor of disclosure than freedom of speech on these things. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, yes, it's not about the lenders themselves. It was those are two separate issues. But with the ratings agencies themselves, I mean, there was a fair amount of disclosure then. There became some more disclosure. I mean, again, now we're looking at rolling back potentially some of those and other regulations that may have safeguarded people in the wake of that. I mean, the freedom of speech issue is not all that different potentially from the one in Citizens United, and that goes towards a lot of these questions, right, of what were meant to be expressive rights for people, for artists, for political sake. How much do those apply to organizations when what they're behaving in is either a commercial act explicitly or an act for which they're paid? And this is exactly an area that the Supreme Court has really waded into in the last decade, and I think will continue to be pretty fruitful.
Well, okay. No, so that's our legal battle of the day. When did you decide to say, "Hey, I hate this. I'm gonna write for major TV shows from now on"? And how did that happen? You basically left you were probably on track to being like one of the top lawyers around because of the cases you were involved in. You could have gone in any direction possible, like banking, hedge funds, being a top lawyer, being federal, being corporate, whatever. And you said, screw it, I'm going to start at the bottom in a totally different field I've never done before.
I don't think I got so deep into it. That's one part of it.
I think unhappy.
I mean, I think there are some people who feel stuck, who have a lot of the problems that I didn't. They already have a wife, kids, a mortgage, just a lot of responsibilities that I didn't have. Where I was, I spent all of law school kind of in this battle with myself. Do I want to be pursuing something more in the arts and entertainment field, or do I want to be here in law? And
so you from the beginning, you felt that dichotomy inside yourself.
Yeah, because I was already thinking about and starting to pursue work in the theater before law school. When I went to law school, I had this idea in my head, which I'd been told by a couple of people: if you can do anything in your life other than work in the arts and be happy, do that. So when I entered law school, I decided I was going to give up everything else, just quit it cold turkey, do nothing but focus on the law. And I was able to make it 3 months. And then the first winter break, I wrote and directed something. And so after that moment, I realized, okay, directing was something I couldn't do while I was in law school just because of the sheer commitment to the hours I would require, but I could spend more and more time writing. So by the end of law school, I was sort of faced with, the decision. I had a job already waiting at a law firm, because that's, at least then was the notion of how things went, right? The summer after your first year at law school, you went and you sort of interned at after your second year, you went and interned at a firm. And then, unless you did something spectacularly urban legend setting bad, you were offered a job back there. So that's what had happened. I knew I had this job waiting for me, and I was thinking about whether I really wanted to go and accept it, or whether I wanted to just branch off entirely and work in the arts. And so the summer after I graduated law school, I'd started to have this really crazy thought of like, wait a second, what if I did go into the arts, and what if I went into TV and film? Which was this thought I'd never had before, because it had all been about theater for me. And TV and film at the time, because of shows like Mad Men and The Good Wife, I was seeing that there was a richness to the storytelling. There was an ability to invest in characters over a long form period of time. And there was also this promise of a writing staff, this notion of a room of people working to make each other's stuff better, that really appealed to me. And so
I always wondered about that.
Yeah.
Like, novels are written by one person.
Mm-hmm.
Why are TV shows written by writing rooms, like a whole staff of people?
I mean, traditionally, it's because you were cranking out 35 episodes, right? And even in modern days, when it went down 28, 27, 24, for a long time,
12.
it settled on 22. So when you're doing 22 episodes, right, every 2 weeks, you have a new episode out there. Trying to do that with one or two people is pretty impossible. People have done it. Aaron Sorkin did it on West Wing and Sports Night to some extent, but even he had a room of people at least sort of pitching the ideas and sort of helping him generate some of the material that he would then actually go and execute. But yeah, 22 or more is a lot for one person to do.
And even like take a show like Seinfeld. There was a writing staff, but still it seemed like, or at least the story goes, Seinfeld and Larry David would end up rewriting every episode and just doing their own thing.
I mean, it's interesting. Seinfeld's had one of the most impressive coaching trees of any show. I mean, you look at those writers, the careers they've gone on to have, obviously a ton of them writing for other shows and some of the most successful shows of all time, but also just, the people who went over to Curb Your Enthusiasm, right? Berg, Mandel, Schaefer, and spent a lot of time with him there. They went on to have, Berg co-runs Silicon Valley. Mandel took over running Veep. Schaefer, ran, co-created The League with his wife. And those shows, especially, The League and Silicon Valley, have a structure that's incredibly like the Curb structure, which is incredibly like the Seinfeld structure.
Which is that you have multiple storylines around the main characters. Every character is sort of every character in the show is sort of fed for that every episode. And then somehow coincidentally or somehow all the plot lines intertwine at the end and get settled.
Absolutely. And so each of them have a little bit of a different flavor to it, right? I mean, there's something a little bit more dyspeptic about Curb. There's something a little bit more sophomoric in the best way and sort of dirty about The League. And, Silicon Valley is kind of the fusion of that sensibility with, a little bit of nerd humor in there too. But you see all those people and you just wonder, I mean, obviously there's an incredible genius that, that Seinfeld and Larry David have, but each of those people, I mean, what were they bringing to it in terms of the structure? What were they bringing to it in terms of their personal stories? I mean, I think, Festivus is famously O'Keefe's story. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of those things that I think came from their own lives in there too. And so,
but in terms of like leadership, like it seems like Seinfeld and maybe even more so Larry David, given the his continued success with Curb Your Enthusiasm, it seems like they were real leaders. They were like coaches and leaders. Like they brought out the best in the actors, they brought out the best in the writers. So everyone went on to like bigger and better, mostly. Like what do you think? What do you think they brought to the table? Not in terms of like writing skill, but in terms of like leadership skill.
Yeah, that would be really hard for me to say. I mean, it seems like on TV, not only is every unhappy show, unhappy in its own way, I think every happy show is happy in its own way. So, I've heard people speculate about shows, in the media that, I've been on behind the scenes, and the speculations are almost always pretty far off. It's hard to just capture the way people are when the kind of the lights are off. So it's hard for me to know exactly what sort of went on in those gaps. But yeah, it's the behind the scenes show is kind of a fascinating one as well.
So you're starting to consider TV and entertainment, but you're still at the law firm. You're making good money. You see a path in front of you that's probably pretty huge and enormous. What's the tipping point? How do you convince yourself that this is a good decision when it's 99% chance it's probably a bad decision, or at least it's a scary one?
So part of that was, at least at that point in time in my life, almost anything I had really tried to do and really tried to do it full out, I'd done, for better or worse. And so that gives you sort of an inappropriate level of confidence. And I think that inappropriate level of confidence is incredibly useful in show business. The other thing is I said before, I was starting to think about TV and film as a route, and I just didn't know how to actually do it. And I've been working on a play that had originated with, in part with Michael Patrick King. Michael Patrick King was sort of the major creative force behind Sex and the City. And there was this play, this musical actually, that he had shepherded by an amazing writer named Nancy Shane. And it came to be called Marcy and the Galaxy. They'd worked on earlier versions of this in a wonderful off-Broadway theater company I was the literary manager of called Transport Group. We decided to do the show. Michael wasn't able to continue on with it because he was actually directing the Sex and the City movie at that time, but he stayed involved where he could. And one time he came to a rehearsal, and afterwards I was talking to him. He was getting to know me a little bit, and it's like, the standard, "Hey kid, what are you doing here? What are you gonna do with your life?" And I said, "Well, I was just kind of thinking a little bit about TV. How does one get into that?" It was just such a sort of innocent offhand question. He said, "Well, the first thing you do is write a spec script." And I'm like, "Yeah, of course, obviously. What is a spec script?" I had no idea. And he explained to me what was the answer at the time, which was a spec script was an example of an existing show, which isn't necessarily true anymore. Now most people sort of write pilots on spec, and that's how you get staffed. But that was kind of the last moment when what you would do is you would write something that's already on the air that would show that you could actually figure it out. So when I graduated law school, after the summer after you graduate, most people go insane studying for the bar exam. They take something called Barbary. It's, whatever it is, 6-8 hours a day for several weeks. I didn't do that. I never went to my Barbary class. What I did instead was I sat down at a desk every single day and I wrote a script.
You wrote. You were working on one script, or?
I wrote one script. I spent whatever that was, 6 weeks writing one script.
And was it a script of an existing show, or was it your own?
It was a script of an existing show. It was Boston Legal from David E. Kelly, and somebody who had been a tremendous influence on my writing up to that point in time. And I just spent every day trying to write as if writing were a job. And so at the end of those 6 weeks, I had this script. It was maybe 2-3 weeks before the bar exam. I studied like hell at that point, sort of crammed for the bar, took the bar, and then I showed up to work at my law firm. I have a job, I have a script, I have no idea what I'm doing. And then the first week I was there, a very lucky thing happened. Lehman went under. The street went up in flames. And so basically me and the people who shorted the market, right? It's me and the big short had a good week. Because while everyone was running around, oh my God, there isn't 100 hours of work a week. How am I supposed to keep my job? How am I going to justify my existence? I said, this is great. There isn't 100 hours of work a week. And so I had the time to write. I had the time to keep writing and sort of build up a little bit of a quiver. And on top of that, I had the time to go and actually take meetings, because we got in those days 4 weeks vacation a year, right? 1 a quarter. Nobody would ever take that because they were afraid if they took that much, they wouldn't look dedicated. I didn't care. I didn't care that much because we had I was already thinking about leaving, and I knew that this was kind of a really good moment with the free time that we just naturally had to take advantage of that. And so the next step was figuring out, I have this script. What do I do with it? Who do I give it to? And so I just said, you know what? I'm looking out the window. I'm looking out and seeing that there are TV shows being shot here in New York, right? Ugly Betty is being shot here. Law and Order is being shot here. There's got to be some way to get on those shows. And so I went up and literally talked to somebody working on one of them and said, "Can I work here?"
What do you mean? Like you saw people shooting on a set?
Yeah, saw people shooting on a set in Cooper Square. Can I go work on the show? How does one work on the show? Where's the writer's room for the show? Can I go apply for a job?
How did you know even who to talk to on the set?
I'm sure I was talking to the most ridiculous person. I had no idea. I just did it. And what somebody said is, no, the writer's room is in L.A. And I thought, oh, That's weird. And then when I actually did a little bit of research into it, I discovered pretty much all the writers' rooms were in LA. And so what I started doing was something more systematic than just reaching out to people on the street. I started kind of trying to reach out to people kind of as a network. So what I did was big spreadsheet guy, built myself a spreadsheet, and I just populated it with anyone I could possibly reach out to. And so this became a combination of anyone I worked with in theater who would give me a connection to somebody in LA, anyone I went to college with who had moved out to LA. And then on top of that, I went college alumni list, just did a ton of different searches, sort of like figured out that a lot of people who lived in LA in the film business didn't necessarily want to advertise that on the alumni network and make it super obvious to find them. But also, if you played around with kind of their search functions, you could figure it out and read between the lines. So I created basically 100 people in my spreadsheet, and I reached out to them.
If you hadn't gone to Harvard, which obviously has huge connections in LA, what would you have done?
I mean, I think there are a lot of other schools, first of all, that do have a huge appeal out there, right? I mean, ranging from Syracuse to Emerson to Northwestern and on. But for those where you don't have that kind of alumni network, there's still going to be some sort of a common point you can find with anybody, right? Whether it's geographically where you're from, or just what your father did, or what your favorite movie was. I mean, I would have just done research on people and found what those points of commonality was and reached out, because it's a cold email, right? You're cold calling. And when you're cold calling, any little nudge, any reason they should open that email from you helps. Anything that doesn't make it look like a form, anything that reminds them that they were once in your place of not knowing anything and desperately needing a break. So that's what I did. I sent out maybe 100 emails to people.
And would the emails include your spec script?
Never. No, I would never do that. I knew sort of instinctively, and then people sort of reinforce this, don't ask for that right out of the gate.
What would your email look like?
What my email looked like is I would explain to somebody who I was. I would explain to them some form of connection. I would tell them, and all this was honestly, why their story or their journey or their work meant something to me. And in every case, I'd sort of done, if I didn't already know who the person was, done the research to it. And then I would sort of ask them just for a conversation. That's really what I wanted. Would you meet with me in person, or would you get on the phone with me, or would you just, share any wisdom with me? And so I was surprised that the yield of it was actually quite higher than I expected. It was about 20%. And then with those 20% who had actually talked to me, then depending on the person, I might ask for a second thing, whether it was to maybe at that point to read me, or potentially just to introduce me to somebody else who might be more directly in my field or more directly able to sort of advise me.
Oh my gosh, I love these clothes. Mizzen and Main, that's Mizzen and Main. It really is the most comfortable work clothes. Travel clothes. I had to travel this whole week. I'm traveling for a week and a half, and I just took Mizzen and Main clothes with me. Close out 2023 in style with comfortable, breathable, packable, and machine washable pieces from Mizzen and Main. As you wrap up your year-end goals, enjoy a Mizzen and Main dress shirt that you can wear confidently. I like that they've very, very just nice, solid colors. I don't really like to get all fancy in patterns and everything, although they do have some pattern shirts, but very comfortable clothes, stretchable pants. It's just super comfortable, but they look professional, and you can wear them casually or professionally. I like some of their flannel shirts or untuck shirts. I love untuck. I never tuck in. So again, whether you're shopping for a special someone or giving yourself the gift you really want, I just buy myself gifts. Mizzen and Main is the perfect gift for any guy who works, travels, and cares about looking and feeling great. As you could tell by my many photos across the internet, I care about looking fantastic. I'm practically a model. And let's be honest, every guy loves to look great. So again, shop now at mizzenandmain.com and save 20% when you spend $130 or more using promo code James. That's promo code James at Mizzen and Main, Mizzen and Main.com. You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply.
Would you ever feel like you needed to offer something instead of, hey, just can you introduce me? Like, would you try to offer some value to whoever you were writing to? And the value might be like, if they were a writer for a show, you could have said, oh, did you think about trying this for this idea? Or I don't know. I don't know what things of value you would offer, but
I mean, honestly, the value I was offering was essentially the opportunity to help me. That was the opportunity to
most
be,
people are not going to respond to that.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how many people actually respond to the idea of like, oh, can I pay this forward? Can I help somebody who's, just starting out, somebody who is not as successful as I am, or
I would
as
feel they get
jaded as
those
I am.
emails all the time, though. So that's why it's few and far between that they would actually open them and read them and then help them.
I mean, I get those emails. On this side, I get those emails a lot, and I respond to most of them. Like if I feel like that person is genuine in their desire and they've put in the effort of, it's not just a form letter, and I can sort of tell like, no, this matters to them. Then yeah, I do put that in, and just this sort of awareness that look, you do need somebody to help you at some point in time. You do need somebody to open a door and to mentor you and to sort of encourage a future generation of people to do this. So, I mean, obviously, over time, I've been able to offer them more things than that. But on the first time, I mean, even saying something like, "Oh, I'll come in and I'll solve your show for you." I mean, nobody wants to hear that.
Right.
It would sound arrogant, and it would also be a potential legal problem because, I mean, a lot of times they can't even take sort of submissions or things like that from somebody who's not on the staff. I mean, I think what helped is that I was asking sort of the minimum amount. I wasn't asking somebody to read my script. I wasn't asking them to get me a job. I was just asking to talk. And so, like I said, 20% was the initial yield, but I was able to sort of build off of that through those conversations to get a couple of reads and to get a couple of introductions. And what I would do is I would follow up too. I would like put it in my spreadsheet. This day is the day when I contacted somebody. And then I would follow up again, after a certain period of time and sort of set this rule for myself that, I can contact somebody 3 times.
So it's like, so just to summarize, it's like in this first stage, there's a point of commonality, which you would kind of use to sort of break through the ice a little bit from a stranger. And then there's the ask for as small a thing as possible, even if it's just a conversation or an intro or whatever. And then the third thing, which you just said,
was following up.
Following up, yeah. So keeping track of everything with the spreadsheet and then following up.
And I found the following up is invaluable, and I've seen that on this side of it as well. Often the not responding to somebody is just because you're in the middle of running from the writer's room to editing to set to a million other things, and it's just not a high priority. And if you didn't respond that second, you're going to absolutely forget about it. And if the person who wrote you forgets about it too, it just doesn't seem like it potentially mattered to them enough that really you needed to spend the time doing this. But the people I followed up with, a couple of times, some of them, that really wound up making a big difference.
And so what happened next? Like what was sort of the break?
So what I would do is I would start coming out to LA. I would schedule a week of vacation, and I would just sit in a room with anyone who would talk to me, whether they were an executive, an agent, an actor, a director, an assistant, just anyone who could tell me about the industry and make some connections. And I like to say you can tell the story a bunch of different ways, right? You can tell it through I met all of these different people, and only one of them helped. So which is initially, which is kind of the true story, right? In one sense, but the other story is you could tell it like Star Wars, like you had the perfect little shot that made it through, and all you need is that one. And so for me, the first mover was a guy named Gen Maynard. Often referred to as the General. And Gen was, somebody can fact check this, but I believe the first reality executive in the history of television. And Gen had, as an assistant, brought in a show called The Amazing Race. And then he brought in a show called Survivor. And then he moved over to the dramatic, sort of the narrative, the scripted side, and then developed a show called CSI. So Gen had a very good moment.
What like he worked for a network?
He worked for CBS. First a production company, I believe, and then he worked for CBS, and then later a few other places. And I just happened to call Gen or reach out to Gen at a moment where he I think was just sort of exiting his network deal, and so had a little bit of time, just very fortuitous that my email hit him at the right moment. And so
I think this is a consequence, though, of writing to a lot of people.
Absolutely.
So if you write to 100 people, one of them will be in their fortuitous moment.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at sort of the network of these, and I can sort of double back later, but I happened to catch Gen in this moment. We got on the phone, and it was like he was in a 1940s hard-boiled thriller, right? He was like, who is this? Who are you? Where are you? What's going on? And I'm like, hi. And he's like, where are you? I'm like, New York. He's like, I was in New York. I had to quit and move out to LA. Do you have a job? Yeah. Are you making any money? Yeah. Oh, they're really going to hate you. No one's going to care. Do you have a script? Yeah. Nobody wants to read it. I'm like, okay. He's like, send it to me. And then that was the whole call. It was just dizzying. And I sent him the script. He liked the script. A week later, I got an email back, terse, perfect. It just said, this is good enough to get a job. Call me when you're out here. So I just booked a trip. I just booked a trip that day. And when I got out, I had coffee with him at the Saddle Ranch on the Sunset Strip. For those of you who've spent time in LA, that's ridiculous and wonderful. And at that meeting, Gen said, okay, I'm setting 2 meetings for you while you're out here. Let's just see how you do. And he sent me 2 meetings, one of which was with a guy named Josh Perlman, whom I believe I reminded him of in some sense, because Josh had also gone to law school, also kind of, sort of departed from that path. And he had he had initially been an executive, then he became a writer, and he had just created a television show called Drop Dead Diva. And so I met with Josh about a month after that show had been picked up. He'd already hired people, but he read my script, and it turned out that his first stuff was off of, he created a video that was based on Ally McBeal, and then he wrote a spec episode of The Practice. And so here I was also with a David E. Kelley spec script and a similar background, and he said, this is great. If you had come here a month ago, I would have hired you. I don't have any jobs at the moment, but stay in touch. And I thought to myself, what a horrible thing to say. Because if he was lying to me, that's so mean. And if he was telling the truth, that's so mean. And I stayed in touch. And a few months later, I was coming back to LA. I reached out to him and he's like, I'm too busy. He was in the middle of making the show. I'm too busy, but stay in touch. And then the fall happened. His show got a pickup for another season. And I sent him an email, congratulations. And he wrote back, if I offered you a job, would you take it? I said, yes. Sent him my resume again, which he asked for. And then he never wrote back. And I was sitting there in my office. At this point in time, I'd been a lawyer for a little over maybe 15, 16 months at this point in time. And I was at my office down in the financial district. I'm like, what just happened? And as the days went by, I'm waiting for this email for him. I never got an email. And I'm like, do I have a job? Do I not have a job? What is my life? Where do I live? And so I just emailed him and said, I'm doing this again. I'm coming out to LA, booked another trip. And I obviously made it sound like I was out there for other business and said, hey, while I'm out here, do you want to meet? And he said, yeah, of course. And Monday came around. We were supposed to meet. He bumped it to the next day. He bumped it to the next day. And I thought, oh, this isn't good. This is really not, this is not a high priority. And then I showed up and it was not just him, but it was actually the other executive producer on the show. And I realized, oh, that's why this is bumped. This is actually like a real job interview and you got everyone together for it. And I was lucky enough to book it. And by the time I went home from LA, I had landed a job as not a writer, but a writer's assistant. I had landed a job that was a 90% pay cut from being a lawyer, and I was so happy about it.
That's a really great story. I mean, there's so many lessons to be learned, but I think also an important one is people don't realize the importance of when someone says, let me know if you're ever at X, just go to X and say, oh, I was coming here anyway. Like, there's kind of like this backdoor way of, because if you had just waited for an opportunity to be in LA, you never would have been there. You had to kind of, as soon as the door was open, you kind of had to go through that door.
Yeah, look, there's obviously a fine line between being a creepy stalker and following up. And if you can't find that line, you're probably not going to have a great career. But the persistence certainly paid off, and as well as that initial group of people I contacted. I mean, what's really funny about it is, it didn't wind up exactly as I thought. Gen was somebody who was not primarily known for scripted TV, and yet that wound up with my first job in scripted TV. Another guy whom I contacted, and we had like a lovely lunch together that kind of led nowhere, and we stayed in touch. Like years later, he wound up offering me a job, which I don't think, I don't think we would have just known to stay in touch or known each other if I hadn't met him in those first circumstances. And somebody else I'd met who was also slightly dismissive at first wound up similarly reading my script and gave me some incredible notes on it. And those incredible notes actually helped make it stronger. And it was that stronger version that Josh Berman read and hired me off of. So who knows? Maybe if I hadn't gotten those notes, it wouldn't have been there. So these things do kind of have a way of coming together.
Well, what were some of those notes that made it stronger?
The notes were at the time, so I was really trying to hew very closely to the way the TV show worked. And so I had written this episode, and I'm trying to think what year this is. This is probably 2007 when I wrote it. And so there was a lot of discussion about the tribunals that were springing up to deal with some of the consequences of our foreign wars. And so I had written this case about in the show about an American student who was arrested abroad in Iraq and being charged in this Iraqi court, which the Iraqi legal system was sort of under our extreme guidance, but there was a real question of whether it was a truly independent legal system or what. And so I wrote this case where, it was all about that, but it was done in Massachusetts, in Boston court, in federal court, and having this argument about this kid who was around the world. And the person I spoke to said, well, why don't you just go to Iraq? Why don't the characters go to Iraq? Isn't that going to be a lot more dramatic? And I had thought, oh, well, the show would never do that because that just would sort of break the framework of the show and that would be a little bit too expensive. And he's like, but this isn't an actual episode of the show. You've already shown you can write an actual episode of the show, but why not make it more dramatic? Why not make the most dramatic version of this possible? And also, why not make it a little bit special to stand out from the pile? And I'm like, right, those are really good ideas. And it, reminded me of the difference of thinking like a producer versus thinking purely like a writer. And so there are times when you're writing a script where, like right now, if I'm writing a script that I know in 2 weeks we have to go shoot, then I do have to think about producibility and I have to think about the scale and the expense and not writing ridiculous things. I'm going to have to scale back later because it would just never happen on the timeline or budget. But if you're writing something that's purely a spec script that's meant to get you a job or an agent that you think is unlikely to be produced, or that's just really the pipe dream, write it as imaginatively and as wonderfully as possible. Do everything to show off every tool in your book and to get their attention.
Although you thinking this is not within the framework of the show, that's reasonable too, because it shows that you respect, if you are writing a spec script, it shows you do understand and respect the framework of how they produce their show.
Absolutely. And he'd seen that and he thought, no, you've shown enough of that elsewhere. If you make some of these changes, it's just going to amp up the drama and make it more special. And he was 100% right. It made it a stronger sample.
So now you're on Drop Dead Divas.
Drop Dead Diva.
And Drop Dead Diva. And that show wasn't the longest lasting show in history.
That show ran 6 years. It was canceled twice and kept coming back from the dead, much
Really?
like the lead character.
I didn't know that. And but then you ended up, where'd you go next?
My next show was The Newsroom.
Which is a huge HBO show. Like, it sort of feels like you had this like gifted career, but like, how did you go from like Drop Dead Diva to The Newsroom?
I was on Drop Dead Diva for 2 years, and while I was there, I wrote a movie called Lunch Money with a friend of mine, Graham Sack, and that movie wound up doing well in a host of competitions. The
movie itself or the script?
The script. The movie has yet to be made. The movie was actually about the fact that both Graham and I, who we did college theater together, we had wound up in sort of the New York financial world in one way or another, and we're both there during the crash. Me directly, at a law firm, him at Morgan Stanley, and so we were sort of thinking about the ways in which this thing was just kind of a grand comedy in a certain respect that we weren't sort of seeing the media react to. So the whole idea was to reset it as a high school comedy. So it's all about sort of a Ferris Bueller freewheeling kid who happens to get the kids in his school to gamble on academic grades, and off of that winds up with grade-backed securities that crash the school. So it's this, obviously an allegory about what happened, but it's also just really kind of this fun teenage coming-of-age comedy, very much like somewhere between like John Hughes and Superbad. So we wrote
That sounds
this
like
thing.
a great idea, actually.
It's a super, super fun movie. And it wound up doing really well, the screenplay of it, in a bunch of competitions. And so at the time, I had spent 2 seasons on Drop Dead Diva. I had written 1 episode of the show, and I'd gotten an agent. So it turned out that just in the history of that show, for whatever reason, some shows tend to promote people, some shows don't tend to promote people. And that was a show where they just, for whatever reason, didn't promote people. And it became clear that if I came back, it would be the same situation. I'd still be the writer's assistant, and I wouldn't be a staff writer, which is the sort of entry rung for a writing job. And, I'd like to think I would have had the confidence otherwise to say I'm walking out the door, but I think also because I had this movie starting to do well, it really bolstered me to be able to say, I just need to bet on myself. I need to keep betting on myself. That's what I did when I left my job at the law firm. That's what I did when I came out here, and so I got to do that again. So that's what I did. I left the show and spent several months starting another screenplay, and then one day I read a story in the I forget what online paper it was, but in one of the online rags of the entertainment industry, its story said after the first season of the Newsroom, Sorkin fires entire staff except girlfriend, and as it turned out, that wasn't true. Almost no part of that was true. But, not all the entertainment headlines are true. But at the time, I didn't know that. All I knew was that Aaron Sorkin, a writer that I loved, whose work I knew inside out, and who had a TV show, The Newsroom, the first season of which I really, really enjoyed, apparently needed writers. And I was a writer who needed work, so clearly we should meet. And I called up my agent and I said, get me into a room with him. I don't know how you do it. Just get me into a room with him. And a couple of things, luckily happened to make that possible. One is that my agent had just moved agencies, and by virtue of that, had much more freedom to operate. It was a little bit more of a decentralized system, so he didn't have to submit everything through his boss and have his boss aggregate everything from the department and decide, who is this kid without that many writing credits? Because if I'd been at the first agency, they probably would have pulled me out of the pile and said, nope, can't do it. He's not experienced enough. So that was one thing, is that my agent was able to operate. And the other thing was that I had just written a script that my agent, in fact, did not love. My manager really didn't love. And I said, look, I know you guys are not the biggest fans of this thing. I love this thing, and I can promise you that Aaron's going to love it too. So send this thing.
What was it? This script was not the movie script?
No, this was a TV pilot called The Main Stem. And it was all about the world of Broadway in the 1950s, right? Coming back full circle to sort of my first love. And so it was Broadway, the year 1950, kind of the last minute that New York, that sort of the theater scene was the center of New York. New York was the center of American culture, deals with these people who all kind of have nested layers of identity. All of them are play acting in their work, play acting in their private lives. And it was a script that, in a way, has kind of been my personal Mad Men, in the sense that, Matt Weiner carried that script around for a number of years before it was actually made. And it just wound up being, I've heard, the thing that got him on The Sopranos and got him a lot of other stuff. And for me, this was the thing that, sure enough, got me in that room and booked that job, and actually also wound up booking the Good Wife job. So it's just been the piece of material that gets me work so far.
So with Aaron Sorkin in the Newsroom, so you meet him.
Yep.
And he likes, I guess, the script. How does he decide to hire a writer? Because every character, it seems, is like speaking in his voice, but just switching characters around.
Meeting Aaron was actually one of that interview is the strangest interview I've ever had for a show, which was kind of great, because I came up to this office, kind of a bungalow on the Sunset Gower lot right across from where we shot the show. And I come up and I was expecting to have, an assistant or somebody greet me outside. Nobody greets me. Instead, I can just walk right up to the room where I can hear the previous interview is going on. And I hear this roar of laughter from inside the room, which lets me know not only is this guy killing, but also that laughter was not the laughter of one person or two people. It was like 7 people laughing, which is like, how many people are in that fucking room? That's not, I mean, normally an interview for a job on a show is 2 people. And so anyway, I sit out there waiting, and I hadn't been nervous, and I finally started to get a little bit nervous. And then the guy comes out of the room, and then a minute later, they come and ask me to come into the room. And sure enough, it was Aaron along with the returning writers on the show. Because again, hadn't fired the entire writing staff. There were a bunch of returning writers, and he included them all in this process. And the moment I walked in and sort of met Aaron was very strange. I'd been nervous, and then I just instantly got very calm. I just felt like on some level, we just kind of recognized each other. It was incredibly strange. And we just fell into like a very easy rapport talking about the show and current events and sort of philosophies. And then I wound up doing something which I've heard many times people tell you not to do. I pitched a story. I pitched a story for the Newsroom, and then he sort of pitched back at me, and we kind of wound up having this little almost
riffing off
mini,
of your pitch.
Yeah, we kind of had this like little mini work session in the room together, and it went really well. At the end of it, I think literally what he said was, "Adam, you can go tell your agents, go tell everyone else. This went really well. This went really well." And I'm like, "Okay, cool. Yeah, you'll be hearing from us soon." And I walked out of there with the thing of like, "Oh, well, if I didn't get this job, I don't know what getting a job is." And then it turned out I did get it, but I didn't hear for another 2 weeks. So sometimes, even when you get it, you got to wait a little while to find out.
And it seems like, I watched all of the Newsroom. I think I've probably watched all of every series that you've worked on, except for Drop Dead Diva. I didn't
Go
watch
back.
that.
There's a lot of good stuff in there.
I will.
Ben Feldman.
I didn't
Ben
hear
Feldman.
from it. I didn't hear about it even until preparing for you. But the Newsroom, and just in general, his stuff like West Wing, Sports Night. What was one? Studio 60.
Studio 60 on Sunset Strip.
Which I love that show. He has such a distinctive writing voice. He's probably the one TV writer you would say that's Aaron Sorkin just from how the characters are acting and from how the script's written. Like I can't think of any other TV writer with such a distinctive writing style. And how does he do it? Like what makes it? I don't know. It's not like what makes it distinctive, but why does he do it that way? Like it comes across in such an unusual way.
I mean, first, I might take a slight issue that other people don't have that. I think there are other people from David E. Kelly to to Koppelman and Levine to plenty of other people out there who do, I think, have kind of a recognizable voice. But Aaron's is certainly clear and pure and his own.
All right, let's just say it's like unusually Aaron Sorkin.
Sure. I mean, I think what's really interesting is that Aaron doesn't feel the need to try to create something that is in and of other people's expectations. Particularly, it's his voice. It's how he sees the world. It's the stories he wants to tell, and there are rhythms that he has honed in his personal life through writing for the stage, film, TV, all of it that just work. I mean, it's sort of a. It's like at times there's something vaudevillian about it. At times there's something that feels like a good litigator's patter. I mean,
put it this way: you could write a caricature of, like a parody.
Many people have.
Right. So when you're writing for him and you have to put yourself kind of in his head and his writing voice, what are you doing differently than, let's say, for other writers? You have to write like very fast somehow. Or the words have to come out very fast in every character's voice.
No, you're not doing any of that. And I think he's aware that if people tried to do that, it would be a little bit of a waste of everybody's time. Because here's the thing. I think the best TV shows probably work off of, the ones that have writing staffs, work off of some acknowledgement that people have different skill sets or different things they can bring to it. And that it might be a little bit of a duplication of energy to have everybody sit around writing Aaron Sorkin patter at him as fast as humanly possible. He can do that, and he can do it I'm going to guess better than you or I can. So he doesn't really need that. What he needs, or at least what he needed at the time, was at that point in time, Aaron had written, 4 seasons of The West Wing, 2 seasons of Sports Night, 1 season of Studio 60, right? So he's written whatever that is, 154, add the first seasons of Newsroom. I don't know, maybe he's written 164 episodes of TV at this point in time. So what Aaron Sorkin needed was just some more ideas, just some more perspectives, just a lot of really intelligent people in a room arguing with each other and sharing their idiosyncratic portraits. And so that he could see from moments like, okay, this is an area to get into. This is a conflict I can build on. And so, that's primarily, at least on Newsroom, what he was looking for us to do.
And then, so you went from that to, I guess, that ran a few seasons, then The Good Wife.
I was on Newsroom. In between, I was on a show called State of Affairs on NBC, which was one of Katie Heigl's much sort of buoyed returns to television. That one kind of based on a story of Central Intelligence Agency's briefers to the president. So I spent there. That lasted only a season. So it's not all the name brand ones. There was something else in there. We worked hard on that one. Didn't last. And then from that, I was on to Good Wife. Yeah.
Were you ever worried, like when State of Affairs got canceled? Were you ever worried? Oh, that's it. I'm over.
No.
Or you always had that confidence that you'd find the next thing.
Yeah. For better or worse, again, I've just and it's interesting. I think when you look at your career on paper, it looks very different than it feels at the time. At the time, there are always so many different things going on. There are movies, there are pilots, there are things that you're trying to shepherd in various ways. You're just working as hard as you can on all the fronts and just sort of believing that some or all of them are gonna pay off. And so, if a TV
similar
show,
to investing, I would say
it is very similar to investing. And I think early on I spoke to a writer/executive who had this belief that, always have at least 3 projects going, and preferably in different phases of development.
So like when you were done with State Affairs, what projects did you have going?
I had a pilot I was writing. I had a pilot I was pitching. I had a movie that was getting ready to be sold. So I just had a bunch of different things happening. So I sort of had the belief, look, one of these things will hopefully happen. If one of these things doesn't happen, I'll write something else. I'll staff on something else. Something else will come along. I think it's, as long as you're not just sort of waiting for the universe to find you, if you are actually creating material, I think you're just giving yourself a little bit, going back to the idea of the spreadsheet and contacting a million people, give yourself as many possible chances to succeed. And I think one thing I would add to that too is also, and for me, it was about not trying to write what I thought the market wanted, not trying to say, okay, this year everyone wants doctor shows, or this year everyone wants cop shows.
I think people there's always differing advice, because on the one hand, you do want to write broadly, so a lot of people would like there's a ton of cop shows out there. Mm-hmm. So it seems like if you are just pitching a random show and you're from the middle of nowhere, pitching a cop show is not the worst idea, because there's tons of cop shows on. And at the same time, people say, no, don't write what everyone else is writing.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty bad idea. I really do. I think that when you're starting out, that people are just desperate to put you in a box as easily as possible. And so I think to help yourself, it really makes sense to make the box that you're going to be most comfortable living in.
Yeah.
And to sort of unify the parts of yourself that exist to a person who doesn't know you very well, right? And when I say the parts of yourself, I mean your resume, your script, and kind of how you present in person. So initially, if you can kind of unify those things where they all make a story that makes sense, because these people aren't going to spend very much time with you or very much time thinking about you. When you can tell a story that makes sense, that really helps. So if you were a cop, right? If you were a cop in Chicago for several years and then you move out to LA and all you want to write about is the figure skating team, that's going to be a little bit strange to them, and they're not going to know where to put you. And I'm not saying your figure skating show isn't great and isn't going to have a chance later, but initially taking advantage of your practical skills is probably a good thing that will get in the door. And once you're in the door, you can sort of show them what else you can do and pursue some of your other stuff. And sort of proof of that, the first two things I wrote, the first spec was a legal spec. The first pilot I wrote was a legal pilot. I've never written a legal pilot or spec since then. So they helped me get in the door, but I've also written things since then, that are about the lottery, that are about Broadway, that are about ice hockey, that are about, movie stars, that are just about a lot of other things. So, yes, writing what you are passionate about really, really matters, and you should do that.
And by the way, that echoes a lot about what Brian Koppelman has said the last time. So Brian Koppelman and David Levine, the creator of Billions, where you work, the last podcast time Brian came on the podcast, he said, don't write what you know, write what you're passionate about.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think these are for me, I'm trying to separate two slightly different things. One is about that first moment of trying to get in that door. And that first moment of trying to get in the door, I think you should kind of leverage whatever it is about your kind of background and your resume. And I'm talking very specifically about Hollywood, but whatever kind of makes you unique and whatever sort of fits with your bio and will sort of help you get that representation, I would do that. And then beyond that, I would write whatever it is, and hopefully these things come together, whatever it is that you're most passionate about, whatever it is that you most want to read.
It seems like so then you wrote on The Good Wife, you wrote on Billions, and both of them kind of intersect with your prior careers and so on.
Yes.
So we could, those are great shows, by the way. I love The Good Wife.
Wonderful
love
show.
Billions. I'm a technical advisor on Billions now, but I always loved the show even before then, and Brian's been on the podcast many times.
Yes.
What makes a good TV show? The broadest question possible. What is a TV show?
I mean, that is radically changing in this moment. My wife is also a writer. She is writing for a TV show right now that's for Facebook. So does a TV show have to be on TV?
Facebook is doing original TV shows?
Oh, yeah.
That's interesting.
Everyone is doing original TV shows. But to answer your question, I mean, I guess for me, what makes a great TV show is a story that I'm going to keep coming back to week in and week out. And as I come back to it, that story deepens and my knowledge of the character deepens. And each week I have more and more expectations about what that person is going to face and what that person is going to do. And those expectations are sometimes fulfilled and sometimes upended in wonderful and satisfying and surprising ways. And so that differentiates it for me from something like a movie, which is just, a complete nugget that often I would spend more time reliving it, but I don't necessarily need to see further into that story or more instances of that story.
So for creators of TV shows, are they looking into kind of a premise where they can create very characters with a lot of depth that could grow through the story arc?
I mean, I hope so.
I mean, it used to be, by the way, there wouldn't be story arcs. So like take Seinfeld, it wouldn't necessarily be that the characters deepened each week, but now on every successful series, the characters do deepen each week.
Usually, I mean, look, there's a lot of debate out there, the difference between the merits of a static versus a dynamic character. And certainly, yes, traditionally what you would see was, the hero of your sitcom, every week he would be unhappy at work, he would bitch that his house, had been taken over by the kids, he would never change, right? Homer Simpson never really changes. Similar to your cop hero every week is going to solve the case and come home and have that beer and feel really good about it, but then still a little bit unsatisfied because he'll never get there. But I think that for me, it's not just having him or her change over time, because some of these people ultimately you want to see that they don't change, but you want to see them tested. You want to see them over and over again go through these situations, and you want to see how far can they bend, like how far can they just sort of like push themselves, because maybe ultimately they won't change, but they'll have considered it, or they'll see instances of it, or they'll really understand the kind of choice they're making, or the life that they're living in. I think for me, kind of the least successful shows are the ones where plot takes either completely over or just takes random turns, where I feel like some integrity fundamentally of the characters that we've been asked to buy into or of the world that we've been asked to buy into doesn't change. I'm a big believer in I will follow your world wherever you take it if you respect your fundamental rules of storytelling.
Oh, so what are fundamental rules of storytelling?
I mean, I'm saying your fundamental rules. So in your show, right, what you've asked me to believe. So for example, I love, soap operas like Desperate Housewives, and I love sci-fi shows like Battlestar Galactica.
My all-time favorite show,
right,
next to Billions.
And I love, I don't know what you can call Twin Peaks other than Twin Peaks. And those shows are wildly divergent, but I think they're true in that each of them sort of has a core vision of what the show is that they announce to you right off the bat and that they never violate, as opposed to some other shows where you can sort of tell, oh, you needed more plot. So now you're going to have the character be someone that they're not. And you're going to kind of pretend that it's character growth, but it's not. You've just broken your show.
So and the viewers can feel it even if they're not intellectually realizing that.
That's my belief, that sometimes
can you make an example, or you don't want to say an example?
I kind of don't want to. I don't want to talk about the shows that I don't love or the shows that lost me over time. But I think normally what will often happen is there'll be a show that I really like for a few episodes or for a season, and then a couple seasons in or 3 seasons in, I'll see that show just kind of turns in some way. That I just feel like they've violated one of those rules of potentially something that the show tells you is smart. Right? So a decision that a character makes, and it's not that the character was deluded. Everything in the world of the show told you that decision was a smart decision. And then later, they've just changed their mind. Actually, that was a dumb decision and we're going to punish you for it. And I'm like, no. It wasn't just the character who thought it was a smart decision. The world of the show said this was a smart decision, right? Or said that this was the limit that something had to happen within, and that if it didn't happen, there were going to be dire consequences. And then later, no consequences. We just changed our mind. So that sort of stuff loses me. And I think a lot of times there's a show who will do that. And as soon as it happens, I will feel like this violation, like this trust with the show has been broken. And so immediately I will stop liking the show, and then often I will find other people stop liking the same show a year later or something. And I'm saying, like, normally I think I'm recognizing the formal thing, and so I'm starting to turn on it intellectually, and then eventually that sort of sows its seeds, and some other people turn on it kind of emotionally. That said, I'm not always the perfect canary in the coal mine. There are plenty of shows that turn me off at some stage that other people continue loving for years and years. So maybe I'm just an old man raving.
No, but like take Battlestar Galactica, for instance, which you mentioned, which I think was very, even if many people hadn't watched it, I think it was, it came around full circle. Like you really got a sense on the last show, they knew what they were doing on the very first show, how they were going to come around full circle. Did you ever feel like in the middle, what could have happened that would have broken the rules of their storytelling, as you suggest? Like what? And so rather than calling out a bad show, let's take a good show. What could they have done poorly that would have thrown you off?
I mean, certainly. So that show does a lot of pullbacks, right? It sort of pulls back from this initial space opera to tell you, actually, we're about religion, and actually, we're about the Middle East peace process, and actually, we're about recognizing what fundamentally are the differences between people and not the differences between people. So if that show that continued to sort of grow in this interesting way and start mixing metaphors in a very deliberate sense, right? It sort of mixes up who the monotheists and the polytheists are. And so it sort of plays with your sympathies about sort of what you'd traditionally, where you'd expect these traits to be assigned. If all of a sudden it went to an incredibly conventional moralistic place in the end, if it sort of like seemed to teach you a lesson at the very end, like actually, America and the monotheists are good, and everyone who has, a different constitution, a different belief system, a different look, they are bad. That would have been a problem, right? If the Cylons in the end were just purely evil and the humans were purely good, I think that would have been kind of a betrayal. Betrayal,
even though in the beginning it started off Cylons were purely evil, it seemed, and the humans were purely good.
Yeah, because the world of that show was very quickly sort of announcing that like things are not entirely as they seem, right? And pretty much from very early on, you kept having these reveals that, don't trust all of these people. People have different motivations. I mean, that was trying to give you this complex kind of twisty world in which, you couldn't necessarily trust what the government, what the military, what your religion had told you. I think that was pretty baked into the show from moment one.
And what's happening with media in general now? Like you just said, Facebook is producing original shows. Apple's producing original shows.
Yep, very much so.
There's a billion channels on cable. Then there's like many different streaming services like Amazon, Netflix, and Hulu are spending tens and tens of billions to produce original shows. It seems like opportunity is greater than ever to make a TV show or to write on one or to act on one. But at the same time, only so many shows can be watched and only so many shows can be renewed. So there's a lot more turnover on shows. You don't really have many shows lasting 100 episodes anymore and going into syndication. I don't even know if the world of syndication even exists in the same way anymore.
Yeah, we're going to find out.
Yeah, because we're probably right at that point.
Yeah.
And so what's happening?
I think what's happening is that everyone wants to get into the content creation place rather than the content acquisition place. They see more money to make and more control to have over it. And I think there's an understanding increasingly that the viewership is never going to be as large as it once was, right? You're going to have very, very few shows that unite large swaths of the culture to watch it.
Because even though there are more TV shows than ever, the actual TV viewing audience, I don't know if it's as big as it once was because now there's YouTube, now there's all sorts of types of
And
media
YouTube
out there,
are making,
podcasting.
Yeah. YouTube's making their own shows. Obviously, a lot of podcasts are turning into TV shows. I mean, yeah, so there's a large fragmentation of the audience. And so there are arguments about whether this is good or bad, but obviously you're increasingly creating niche entertainment. You're creating shows that are incredibly specific and potentially only appealing to a very small demographic. And so maybe you're only showing it to the people for whom that's perfectly made, and that's great. Or maybe you're ignoring kind of some depth that might have happened if you were trying to find a way to bring into or to access larger viewerships. And, maybe we have a world where all of these things are being met right now. Maybe we have a world where, 2.5 Men or its progeny, Big Bang Theory can coexist with Game of Thrones, with Billions, with Insecure, with Handmaid's Tale, and so on.
But like the economics of it all are really different too. But because it seems like because TV's gotten so big, so much movie talent has moved into TV.
Absolutely.
So TV writers, directors, and stars. Movie writers, directors, stars are moving into all of the top television shows. Billions being a great example. We have
Absolutely.
Brian and David were movie writers. Damian Lewis and Paul Giamatti were movie stars, and they're moving into TV. So, and meanwhile, on the movie side, it's all these superhero franchises are in the top 10 movies each year now. So the whole dynamics of the industry are different. Like TV's probably become much more artistic and creative. Movies are much more kind of merchandisable and franchise driven. Again, it seems like also less money in TV just because of the dynamics of a lesser audience per show, less opportunity for syndication, so many more outlets competing. I don't know. How does the economics of it, what do you think of the economics of it and how it affects your career going forward?
Are you telling me?
Or do you not think about it?
Are you telling me I just have to buy more crypto? In case you don't know,
I'm not telling you that.
In case you don't know, my computer for months now has been broadcasting to me pictures of James telling me to buy more crypto, or more accurately, to listen to James tell me which crypto. I don't know. By the way, we should figure out, why is my computer telling me this? And I've checked into this. Most people on Billions, their computer is telling them this as well. So is it
because I send you all emails?
Yes, I think that's the correct answer.
So in your Gmail box,
yes,
Google is aware of that. And Google has their ad networks all over every other website. so I appear everywhere.
I believe that's happening, even though I have specifically turned off anything that allows them to share that information and that I've put blockers on that should allow them not to be able to read these things. Nevertheless, it's happening.
But
so either they're illegally sharing information, I'm accusing you, Google, or I'm not accusing you, and it's just the fact that I so often read, consume, and search for financial information that they're using that to connect us. It's interesting.
Yeah, there
isn't
could
it?
be so many possible entries into your mind that a good ad marketer is doing.
Yes.
Which is not me, by the way. I work with a company very good that does this sort of marketing.
Very good. They're very good. They're right in my computer. I mean, they're not great yet because I haven't clicked through. But that's because I could just ask you. In terms of
very true.
In terms of we'll talk.
Or
about
you could
that
ask. I mean, I've probably. Well, I won't.
We'll talk about it off the air. Yeah. So in terms of the economics of the market, they're changing greatly. I don't think any of us fully know where they're going. I mean, we almost had a writer's strike last year because of some of these issues and the great uncertainty of them and how certain wages for writers and the so-called sort of middle class of writers are being depressed. So that's true. And again, there's kind of an economic side to it, and then there's also a creative side. And so the creative side, I think, is kind of impressive, though, because sometimes when there are these restrictions put on you, it kind of forces the creativity to come out in interesting ways. So you're definitely right in that films are becoming increasingly franchises and increasingly superhero franchises in particular. And so when that happens, you start seeing superhero movies become other things, right? You're starting to see them become sort of genre takes themselves that move beyond the superhero genre and become an excuse to do other things, right? So you get Captain America 2 being a 70s spy thriller, or you get like Logan being, this combination of kind of a neo-noir / nihilistic Western.
So a parental kind of movie.
Right. It's also like, it's a little bit of Little Miss Sunshine in there too. It's, I really like that movie. But you wind up with, trying to sort of disguise a little bit of your content or find other ways to sort of, have the daisies peek through, as it were. Yeah.
So final question or so, as you went from show to show and as you saw yourself improve, and particularly in the beginning, you obviously got better at what you did. Mm-hmm. And what would you say were the keys to improvement? Now you've been on several shows that have been among, like, let's say, the top 10 shows of that year in terms of whether you call it by quality or rating or whatever, I don't know. But you're kind of reaching, peak potential. And how would you suggest people improve in general?
Stop. I think there are a number of things that I've sort of tried to pay attention to. So one of the first things is that my first job was a writer's assistant. And a writer's assistant, I think, is just an incredibly valuable piece of experience to have. Because for those listeners who don't know, a writer's assistant usually sits in the writer's room all day long and essentially takes notes, does research, maybe occasionally opines on something. But just by virtue of that, the writer's assistant usually spends more time in the writer's room than literally any single writer on the show, certainly more time than the showrunner does. So you're actually deeply aware of how stories gain momentum, lose momentum, come to be, come to disappear. And so I really took that sort of bird's eye view as an example to understand, why did one pitch succeed and one pitch not? Because sometimes it wasn't necessarily platonically the best pitch, but why was that person just pitching either his audience more receptively? Was he pitching with more confidence? Like, what was it that allowed pitches to go through? And so I started paying attention to things like that. And so one thing I think I really improved and I learned early on was, it's not important to be purely right, or to think that you're right, or to think that you have like the best possible story. If you can't sell that story to other people and convince them of that story, it's not right, and you can't sell an audience of it. So you've got to figure out how you sell the story. I think that's a really important thing to understand. It's not, how do you take that thing that's inside you and get it out there for the world to see? So I think that's a big one. Another thing has been just to keep reading, keep watching. It's really easy when you're working on a show to just have no time to check anything else out, or to just feel so exhausted that you don't want to see anybody else's content. But when you do that, you wind up, potentially echoing things that are out there in a way that's in a way that seems like you're doing it more deliberately, that can feel like you're ripping stuff off, or that can also, miss sort of some of the advances that are being made. And so I think just staying really aware of your field and aware of what other people are doing can really kind of just help you be part of and contribute to a conversation if that's ultimately what you're trying to do this for, is to be part of a conversation. So those have been really important to me. And I think beyond that, it's just to never stop writing. I don't really ever. And I know that you've probably had some conversation. Have you had conversations on this show about writer's block and things like that?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely with Brian.
Yeah. So Brian and I differ a little bit on that. I don't believe really in writer's block, or at least I believe the one can have writer's block about quality, but I don't believe about output. And so it's sort of a dedication to saying sometimes, you know what, if I have to write this script and the script is 60 pages, let's say I write 5 pages a day. After 12 days, I'm going to have 60 pages. And so I'm just going to do that. I'm just going to have 60 pages in 12 days. And I'm not going to judge those 5 pages every day. I'm going to output them and then move the next day and keep going. And at the end of those 12 days, I'll have 60 pages. And maybe they won't be great. Maybe I'll have to rewrite a bunch of them. But first of all, probably when I look back, they're better than I would have thought they were. And second of all, I can learn from things that happened at the end of the script that are going to make the beginning better. And I wouldn't have learned those lessons if I kept rewriting those first 5 pages over and over and over again. That attempt to perfect them would have stopped me from moving forward and learning other lessons that were probably more valuable. And also that judgment, that just negative self-talk, I found has a way of really building up and sort of holding you back, as opposed to the sense of like, whoa, after 12 days, I have a script. I have a draft. Again, that might not be the final draft. The final draft could be 20% rewritten or 100% rewritten. But I think just setting goals and then meeting them really helps both the final product and sort of the self-esteem. And I think there's a pretty good dialogue, an important one between those two factors.
Well, Adam Perlman, is it safe to say you're head writer on Billions? Is that your official title?
No, my official title is I am a co-executive producer. For all intents and purposes, I'm the number 2 to Brian and David, which means a variety of things. But I run the writers' room when they're not there, and I sit in on the writers' meetings with them and other writers, and then the three of us have a lot of meetings to sort of plot overall arcs, to deal with rewrites of episodes. If they're like I said, if they're not in the writers' room, I'm running the writers' room. If they're not on set, I'm running set. So kind of adding whatever value I can when they're there, and also filling in when they can't be.
Well, and I have to say, it's been a pleasure for me to work with you three guys on this show. It's the first show I've ever even mildly worked on. I'm just simply the technical advisor, but when I watch what happens, I can't believe it, actually. You guys must work 16 or 20 hours a day every single day for the past as many months as since this season you guys started working on this season. It's unbelievable the amount of work that you guys are doing. Does every show work that hard? I'm not even trying to compliment you or anything. It seems like actually you're brutalizing yourselves.
I will say, no, not every show works necessarily this hard. I mean, I would say on most
I feel like
shows,
I'm even working too hard. I'm doing nothing.
Oh, no. There's no way that's true. No, I'm joking. So a couple of things to that. One, I think most people work pretty hard on their shows, and sometimes you work even harder on a show that doesn't work, sadly, than on one that does, which really can be a heartbreak. On this one, this is probably the hardest I've ever worked. It's the most hours I've ever put in, and part of that is that Brian and David work just an incredible amount, and they demand so much of themselves, and they demand so much of the work that they put out. And I think that sets certainly an example that other people on the staff, and the crew really care about. But it's from top down, it's just an incredible organization. them, the writing staff, the editing, the editorial production, post-production staff, the production staff, the cast, the crew. I mean, it really is sort of good apple after good apple kind of working together with the understanding that, we think we're making something pretty good. And it wouldn't be if the other people weren't there and trying and dedicated to it. So that sense of a common purpose really makes, I think really makes people, when it is the 15th hour of the day, keep going a little bit harder. Because you could say it's good enough. And we try not to do that. We try to make it as good as we can.
No, I definitely see that. And so thanks again, Adam Perlman, describing your shift from the law to TV, how you grew up with it, all the discussions. I love television, so I could talk about this for the next 5 hours, but I'm sure you have to get back to Billions. But thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, James. Appreciate it.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.